People were great at sine law. I would imagine for the most part people were fine with cosine law, although there's one little trick, and we'll see when we mark that learning goal if people fell for it. Um, there's just little things that you have to think about. You know how to do it. Hopefully you know how to punch it into your calculator, but there are a couple of little tricks. But it does get a bit trickier when we mix the two together. And I think I mentioned this yesterday. If you are given, let me see. So the variables here are actually going to be the given, not what you're looking for, but they are what's given in these triangles. These are just diagrams that we're going to use to talk about. Okay. If you're given three pieces of information and it's not a right triangle, it's either sine law or cosine law. You don't get to choose. You don't get to pick your favorite. You have to use one or the other. You have to pick the right one. If it's a sine law question, if it's a sine law triangle, you have three pieces of information that are for sine law, and you try to use cosine law, it's not going to work. Probably you'll figure that out while you're doing it because things won't sub in, but that's the way this stuff works. So you have to know when you use sine law and when you use cosine law. The two bullets here for sine law say if you are given two angles and any side length, doesn't matter what two angles, if you're given two angles and any side length, you're using sine law. And if you're given two sides and one angle that's opposite one of those sides, then you're using sine. So let me show you what I mean. Here I'm given two angles and a side. Now the side happens to be across from one of the angles, okay? And that's the trick for sine law, is you always have to have one pair that you're given, that you already know, where they are across from each other. If you ever have that, you're using sine law. I could imagine one situation, and I'll draw an extra little one down here to show this. So here's my triangle. And if I'm given this one, and this one, and this one, let's say 50 or something like that. If I'm given, ladies, if I'm given those three values, as you know, you can find this angle because you already know two angles, so you can find the third, and then you've got a pair of angle and side that are across from each other that you already know. And that's always the trick for sine law. So again here, I've got an angle and a side length across from it, so I'm using sine law. And there's only one thing you can find as well, and it's whatever is across from the other thing that you're given. So in this case, I could find this angle too, but using these, I can find that side length. That's it. Okay? So that's sine law. It's easy to tell when you have an angle and a side length across from each other. But for the most part, this is just me, everybody's different, but I usually notice if it's cosine law first, and if it's not cosine law, I know it's sine law. Because that one special case can be tricky and fools people. And it's a sine law question, but they think it's cosine, they try to do cosine, it doesn't work. So I always look for cosine first, and if it's not cosine, it's definitely sine law no matter what. And as long as you're given three pieces of information, it's one or the other. There's no other questions that you need something else for. So cosine law is if you're given all three sides and you're looking for an angle, you're using cosine law, or you're given two sides and the angle between them. So all three sides, there you go, there's three sides, and you could find any of the three angles. You're probably going to be told which one. And this is what we mean by the contained angle. You're given two sides and the angle between them. If I was given one of the other angles, it would be sine law because it would be across from each other. So cosine law is always three sides or two sides and the angle between them. And if it's not cosine, it has to be sine. And if you're only given two things, you can't do it. You need three measurements in a triangle to find anything else. That's true for SOHCAHTOA as well. It's just one of the measurements is always the right angle. So on the back of your page, you should find these four triangles. And what we're going to do is just decide, and you can go back and punch it into your calculator for extra practice later if you want, but we're just going to decide which law we're using and write the formula that you would use to calculate. So how many people think they know if you're using sine law or cosine law for the first one? Okay, who wants to tell me? What do you think? Why? You're given three sides, so it's cosine. Question?
No.
Oh, okay. And we're looking for an angle, so we want this one. Cos theta equals, and what's the tricky thing that I have to remember for cosine law? This is the one place that you might make a mistake.
That the C is across from the angle.
Right, so if I'm looking for theta, what am I doing with the 17.3? It's the one that you subtract on top. So the cosine law goes 16 squared plus 14.8 squared minus 17.3 squared. 2 times 16 times 14.8. And this is a tricky one to put into your calculator because you need two sets of brackets, or you need a fancy calculator that does fractions or whatever, right? And that's, again, a big part of practicing this stuff. Okay, next one. I will go and do the answers later as well. Next one, you're thinking to yourself, if it's sine law or cosine law, I want you to think about it first. Doesn't work anymore? I don't think none of those have it. Here, use one of these. There's two right here. They're good. Okay, what do you think? How many people think they know? Kenzie, what is it? Sine law, why? Yeah, good. We have two angles in any side, and then also we have one angle and the side length across them. We already know that, and one other piece of information. So definitely sine law. I'm going to write this down. Cosine, sine. Okay, and if I'm looking, oh, this is the tricky one, where I'm looking for x and I don't have the angle across from it, but I can find that by going 180 minus 22 minus 72, and that gives you 86. So this is 86, and that's the number that I want to use. And if it's a side length, I write x over sine of the angle across from it equals sides are either both always on top or both always on bottom. So if x is on top, I got to use 43 on top over sine of 22. And then again, you would rearrange that and then punch it into your calculator. Next one. It's funny, these wedge ones are sometimes a little tricky. People have a hard time visualizing the wedge ones. Some people do, some people don't. Some people are very visual and some people aren't. Is it sine law or cosine law? Ben, what do you think? Why? Yeah, and I have this angle and this side length that are across from each other, and you got two sides and one of the angles across, not the angle between them. This would be the angle between them. So I've got the other one. Very good. So sine theta over 15 equals sine 67 over 14. Rearrange, punch it into your calculator. And so the last one, by process of elimination, you might already have guessed what it's going to be, but we should be able to recognize it. What's this last one? Ellie? How come?
Because it's two sides and the contained angle.
Yeah, two sides and the contained angle, the angle between them. Very good. And so this one's the one that's like c squared equals, but some people wanted to skip that and write it like this, and that's fine. So you don't have to write the whole thing twice. So it's going to be 3 squared plus 3.1 squared minus 2 times 3 times 3.1 times cos of the angle between them. And remember, when you're taking the square root of some big thing, you got to put brackets around it for a lot of those calculators out there. Any questions about any of that? We're just going to try it a couple times, and then you can, and then there's a bunch more for you to practice. Go ahead and try it if you want. You got to pick which law, write the correct equation, rearrange, solve. So what is this one? Sarah? Sine law, because I've got an angle and a side pair. Very good. Okay, so I've written the equation and rearranged, and that's what you should have. And then has anybody got an answer? 58 degrees. Very good. That's what I got too. Probably forgot shift, sine. Right? Okay, what's this next one? Cosine law, two sides and the angle between them. Who's got an answer for this one? Very good. 4.4. That's what I got as well. Any questions about any of that? Got to choose the right law, choose the right form, sub in, rearrange maybe, and then solve.